Hello, this is the edTPA Task 4 overview. There will be other videos on specific components, but this video is to give you an overview before you really dive into each little component of Task 4. This is going to be on mathematics. Some of the key concepts of Task 4 and what your score is really wanting you to consider and what they will be evaluating you on are: how will you analyze your whole class to identify patterns of learning in math? How will you use student work samples to analyze mathematical errors, confusion, and partial understanding? Are you able to identify specific examples from the student work sample and put that into writing to show your score how you know a student has some confusion? How will you re-engage students in learning to address identified areas of challenge or needs? And how will you use evidence of student learning to reflect on the effectiveness of your own re-engagement lesson? These are all the steps that you will do in Task 4. You can find them on page 43 of your edTPA handbook for elementary education. I'm going to break down each one of these steps. The first step is to select a focus class. Now remember, you can use the same focus class for Task 4 as you used for Task 1 through 3, or you can use a different class. That's up to you and your mentor which one works best for you. You do not have to use the same class that you were placed for your internship. If you are in a science classroom and the students rotate, it's probably going to be easier for you to go to that math classroom. Ideally, the class would be a math class with at least 8 students. Most general classrooms have more than 8 students, but I know some people are placed in a special education classroom. You need to have at least 8 students to be able to do this task effectively, and you should be teaching a math concept. First thing, you should be completing your context for learning. Go ahead and watch that context for learning video that's located in the Task 1 section if you have not already. This covers both the literacy context for learning and the mathematic context for learning for you. As you can see, when you go to the elementary ed tab on the website, when you go to Task 4, the first downloadable is your context for learning. Your next step is to talk to your mentor teacher about the central focus of their current lessons and identify 3 to 5 consecutive lessons that build towards a common central focus or learning objective. What that means is that you're going to be observing 3 to 5 lessons, so you want them to all be on the same topic. If you're where you are in the year, your teacher is currently teaching addition, but they're getting ready to switch to subtraction, you might want to wait until they start that subtraction unit to make your observations. Or if there is kind of a random like money counting or telling time lesson that your teacher wants to kind of throw in between some multiplication unit or something like that, then that would not count towards one of your 3 to 5 lessons. You want those 3 to 5 lessons that you're going to be observing to all be on the same topic or central focus. You can start observing at the beginning, the middle, or the end, as long as you have 3 to 5 lessons that you can observe that are all on the same central focus. You're going to use the learning segment overview. It can be found on your website with the Task 4 materials. It says Task 4 Learning Segment Overview, and it looks similar to this, only it's not completed. This is an example of one that is completed, so you can kind of see how much you're expected. They do have a spot for the 4th and 5th lesson if you should choose to observe those. However, you're not going to get any bonus points for that. Observing 3 lessons is just fine. You can also use bullet points when completing this. So this is a closer look at that learning segment overview. This one's filled out. As you can see, she put the central focus. This is what the lessons are all about. Then the state standards. What standard do these lessons meet? Notice she did not put Alabama anywhere in here so that we can remain as not anonymous as possible. For the learning objectives for each lesson may be the same or they might be different. They might build upon each other slightly. The learning strategies, these can be bullet points or they can be in sentences, whichever one is more comfortable for you. And same with the formative and summative assessments. This can be bullet points or it can be sentences. After you observe your 3 to 5 lessons, you're going to be giving the whole class a formative assessment. This formative assessment can be developed on your own, or it can actually be adapted from an existing test or quiz that your mentor teacher has. Now, this formative assessment, it is formative, so it's supposed to be giving an idea of where the students currently are in the unit. It does not have to be for a grade. That would be up to your mentor teacher, and that's completely separate from the edTPA experience. And it should be identifying procedural skills, conceptual skills, and math reasoning skills. You might notice that this example, the student actually wrote on there that this one's going to measure conceptual, this problem measures procedural, and this measures problem solving or those math reasoning skills. Now we also know that some questions are going to test all of those, but for simplicity's sake, a lot of students find it much easier to develop 3 specific types of questions with conceptual in mind, procedural in mind, and those reasoning skills in mind. After you have come up with your assessment that you're going to use, you're going to need to define your evaluation criteria. Most of the time, the easiest way to do this is something that looks like a rubric or is a rubric. This works best, but there are some other options. You're going to decide, does the student get full credit? Is there a way for the student to get partial credit? And if so, what does that partial credit look like? How do I determine if that student gets partial credit or not? Most students find it helpful if they require their student, or most candidates find it helpful if they require their students to show their work. When an elementary student shows their work, then you can give them some partial credit and you know exactly what they're thinking. There's going to be another video about this evaluation criteria where we dive into a few more examples. After you have developed your evaluation criteria, you will then give the assessment to the students and you will collect and analyze the student work. You're going to be analyzing instead of grading or scoring because we're doing more than just grading. We're actually looking at what do the students know, what can they do, as well as areas of growth. As you can see from this example, this candidate wrote in what the student can do. You got all of your factors right here. And then they went on to say what areas of growth. But you need to make sure that your arrays match one of the factor pairs you listed. So you want to make sure that you are showing what did the students do well, and then also what areas of growth. After you collect and analyze your student work from every student in your classroom, you're going to select 3 students that demonstrate similar struggle or misconception, and you're going to be teaching them a re-engagement lesson. You want to pick students who made a similar error. You want to define whether that error was procedural, conceptual, or reasoning. And those 3 students should have that same type of error. You also want to select students that will benefit from a 20 to 45 minute re-engagement lesson, that they're going to hopefully get it after this re-engagement lesson. Yes, you're going to have students that are really, really struggling and really far behind and just seem completely lost, and they definitely need help. But they're not the ones that you're focusing on for this re-engagement lesson, because these are the ones you want are the ones that are right there on the bubble that almost get it, but there's just one little component that they're missing. The errors don't necessarily have to be on the same problem. They could be, but you're really looking more at the type of error that occurred. This is an example of why we don't want to just grade the student work, that we are analyzing the student work. As you can see, there's a grade up here. But I've got 4 student work, student A, B, C, and D. And if I was going to pick 3 of these students that I would help, I would be picking student A, student D, and student C. Now, the reason that I would pick those is because it was very clear to me while I was evaluating them that they had a mathematical reasoning or problem-solving misconception. They didn't understand that how many more was in referencing that I was going to take one number and subtract it from another number. They were actually adding in this case. So this person was adding here, this person was adding here and here. Notice that down here, yes, they got the right answer, but they were still adding. So we don't know how they got to that 39, and that's why it's important for students to show their work. This student might have been copying off of someone else. They might have overheard an answer. We're not really sure. Same with this student. They added here and here, but they got all the right answers and then they circled them, but they didn't show any work down here. So we're really not sure how they got these 2 correct answers because their work would show that they don't understand the concept. Now this student here, yes, they only got 2 out of the 4 answers correct, but when we're looking at it, they subtracted here just fine, or they set it up fine, but then they forgot to cross out the 8 and borrow from that 8. But they did it correct here, down here, so they used a timeline. And yes, this is actually, I just kind of made them up, but the student used a timeline down here, or not timeline, number line down here. So we can assume that they have this idea of stacking the numbers and using that algorithm, but they're still more comfortable with a number line, and they understand the concept. There might be a little bit of procedural misunderstanding when it comes to using that algorithm of stacking the numbers to subtract, but they don't have that mathematical reasoning misunderstanding that student A, student C, and student D do. So the next thing after you select your students, you're going to identify a target learning objective or goal for your re-engagement. What do you want these students to be able to do by the end of the re-engagement lesson? Realistically, what will they be able to learn in 20 to 45 minutes? What do they need to learn to be successful during this learning segment? And what specific goals should these 3 students have? And then you're going to want to pick, remember, you're just focusing on that conceptual, procedural, or reasoning. After you identify your goal or your learning objective for your re-engagement, you're going to want to design that lesson, keeping in mind that the lesson should be about 20 to 45 minutes in length, that you don't need to turn in a lesson plan for edTPA for the portfolio, but you will be describing it in detail. So it probably is helpful for you to at least have some jotted ideas down about the lesson prior to you actually teaching it. The lesson should be on the same topic as your assessment that you gave the whole class, that formative assessment. You don't want to extend the topic, or you don't want to back up the topic. If your assessment was on multiplying fractions, your engagement should be on multiplying fractions. You don't need to be making a re-engagement on what a fraction is or how to multiply. Yes, there are going to be students, most likely, that are still struggling with what a fraction really is, or using multiplication facts and really knowing those, but for this, you're picking 3 students that should be able to, during the course of a re-engagement lesson, be able to then multiply fractions. You're also going to most likely want to choose a different strategy than what was taught during the original lessons. So that's why it's important that learning segment overview, when you observe the lessons and you wrote down how the mentor teacher taught those, you're going to then be justifying why your strategy was perhaps more beneficial for these students, because they'd already learned it one way and they didn't really grasp that concept, so you're trying a different way. You also need to be thinking about a work sample, because you are going to be asked for a work sample during the re-engagement lesson, so you want to make sure that you plan that there is some sort of work sample that you will be able to provide. Next, you're going to teach the re-engagement lesson. This is the fun part of task 4. This is why you became a teacher, right? To teach. So remember, you're going to have your 3 students, and you can talk to your mentor teacher about where a good area to teach would be. I recommend if you are in kindergarten or 1st grade, you might want to go ahead and videotape these lessons, because for kindergarten and 1st grade, your work samples might be a video or audio. Next, you're going to collect those work samples after you're finished doing the re-engagement lesson, teaching that re-engagement lesson. When you're planning those work samples, make sure that your work samples are different from the original assessment. Here's an example of the original formative assessment, and here's an example of the re-engagement lesson work sample that this student planned. They should only focus on one type of problem, either conceptual, procedural, or reasoning. You should keep the same central focus for that assessment, and it must be the student's work. You cannot write down what the student is saying, or if you can't write down what they did. If you do need something verbal, or it's an action such as counting to 10, you're going to need either a video or audio clip. So if you can see here that this student had the formative assessment. They took this last problem, which was a mathematical reasoning type of a problem, and then their re-engagement lesson focused on 3 different mathematical reasoning word problems. Finally, you're going to evaluate the effectiveness of your re-engagement lesson. You're going to use examples from your re-engagement work sample to analyze your teaching, and this is what you're going to be writing for in at least part of the task 4 commentary. So watch the task 4 commentary video for more information on how to answer the specific prompts for task 4.